Well, so we are now officially launching this event. Excellencies, dear colleagues, on behalf of the co-organizers, it is my pleasure to warmly welcome you and thank you for having joined us at Palais des Nations and online for an event launching the second edition of the Geneva Rights and Environmental Talks, organized in the margins of the Human Rights Council. These talks aim to harness the opportunity of this moment of the year when the UN Special Rapporteur on the right to a healthy environment reports to the Human Rights Council to reflect on her work. This year, we are proposing 6 talks in the margins of the Council to unpack and reflect on some of the key messages of the Special Rapporteur, her latest report on the ocean and human rights. We are joined by numerous experts along the 3 days of the talks, where we will be linking to various ongoing multilateral processes, including the 3rd UN Ocean Conference that will take place in a few weeks in Nice. In this first talk, we will be discussing human rights and marine protected areas. Our moderator is Alexandra Gossens-Ishii, who is the representative of Soccer Gakkai International to the United Nations in Geneva, and one of the co-conveners of this talk. Before you are formally welcomed by the UN Special Rapporteur, Astrid Puentes, who will open the event and set the scene for the discussion, I will be sharing some housekeeping rules. Let me remind you that the documents presented, a summary, as well as the video of the event will be made available as usual on the webpage of the event. There is a transcript available for who is online in over 100 languages. And you have a slide indicate how to access it. So to formally open this event, let's now turn to give the floor to the UN Special Rapporteur on the right to a healthy environment, Ms. Astrid Puentes. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Diana, and thank you very much for everyone to be here in such a busy time. I know that there's a lot of things happening, and it's an honor for me, and I'm very grateful for Geneva Environmental Network and SOCA and for Justice and everyone that has not only received the report but also supported in a lot of ways, including with a consultation that we had once I had some of the drafts in December, and also to, as you mentioned, unpack. The first thing that I wanted to tell you is that I decided to do a report on the ocean and human rights because surprisingly, nobody has done it before. And one of the conclusions that one of the theories that I had, and then I concluded and confirmed it when preparing the report, is that one of the biggest challenges that we are seeing today with the environment, the triple planetary crisis, and the ocean is the vision, the compartmentalized and siloed vision. And the ocean is one single biome, and it's, as we know, also it's not only a biome in the sense that it's ecosystems and biodiversity is the source of life. As we know, it's where life in Earth began, and now it's under a lot of threat. And so the main thing that I wanted to do with this report is remind ourselves, and in the Council and in other places, that the ocean is one. I also learned, and very grateful for a lot of people that taught me and remember me, that we should not be talking about the oceans in plural, but one single ocean. And that is something that a lot of people taught me, and I also want to deliver with this. And now talking about marine protected areas, and I want to be very brief as well. So thinking also that with the report and including marine protected areas, one key message is also with the report is that ocean issues, ocean governments, everything, or governance, everything that has to do with the ocean is also linked to human rights. And we should always link it to human rights, including marine protected areas, blue economy, like every single aspect of the ocean. And this is something that I'm also working on, thinking about, and you mentioned, Diana, the UN Ocean Conference in Nice that I'm planning to attend. As you probably know, neither the UN resolutions or the panels or the work around the UN Ocean Conference talk about human rights. And that is something that I'm also working on with a lot of you as well, and with co-organizers, the co-chairs for the conference with Costa Rica and France. Because again, we need, and it's not because of the environment, and it's definitely not because of the mandate that I have or my work, it's because we need that to increase obligations and increase effectiveness. Now, landing on marine protected areas, there are three things that I wanted to mention there. One is that it's very important in thinking and incorporating the ecosystem human rights approach, the human rights-based approach. It helps us to advance effectiveness of not only marine protected areas, but in general, conservation aspects, and also facing a truth. And we were talking yesterday in another side event when we were talking around the conservation principles for private actors. One of the painful realities that we see is that sometimes marine protected areas have been implemented in violation of human rights of indigenous communities. And so it's very important to address this and make sure that marine protected areas, and again, all efforts include and are done with human rights at the center. The other aspect is that, as we know, marine protected areas should not be seen as protecting some areas and then destroying the rest. And that is something that it's also an important aspect of having a comprehensive and holistic perspective for the ocean. That is not giving license to, while we protect some areas, then just do deep mining, offshore fisheries without environmental impact assessments, etc. We need to remember that marine protected areas should be part of a consistent and comprehensive approach. Again, including indigenous peoples, coastal communities, women, youth, and all of that scientific knowledge that they have. And the last point that I wanted to raise as well is how much, and thinking about the 30 by 30, for example, and those objectives that are very important, but again, thinking that it's not only protecting a percentage of the planet while we destroy or impact or advance other activities that can be impactful for the ocean. And I really wanted to be there because you have the report. That's a lot of things. So I'm really looking forward to listening to you and learn from experts and have space also for dialogue.
Thank you so much, Astrid. Thank you very much for setting the scene, just ahead of your introducing, presenting your report formally, the Human Rights Council tomorrow, and for really raising some points already really important in relation to human rights and what we wanted to bring in the discussion today. Also, as mentioned, in light of the June Peace Conference on Ocean. And so now with the panel discussion that we're going to we would like to, and we're really grateful to all of our panelists, that we will bring different perspectives to discuss this issue of and try to really see together whether marine protected areas are in itself sufficient to ensure the protection of the ocean biome and all the fundamental rights associated with it. So that's why you will see that we have different perspectives with each panelist, bringing different angles to this. And we're going to start online with Nela Cernota, who is Associate Human Rights Officer with the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. And she's going to share more about what would be a human rights-based approach to marine conservation and what are the linkages with the target 3, which is the target that the special rapporteur just mentioned on 30 by 30 from the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. So Nela, the floor is yours. We cannot hear you.
Oh,
yes, we can.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's really a pleasure to be here. I'm Nela Cernota from the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. I work in the Environment and Climate Change Unit, and I will, as Alex already mentioned, focus on the interlinkages between Target 3 and the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework and a human rights-based approach. I will highlight that effective action is needed towards achieving Target 3 of the GBF in the marine and coastal context. And at the same time, this action, as already pointed out by the UN Special Rapporteur, must be based in human rights. So as you may know, Target 3 sets out that by 2030, at least 30% of marine and coastal areas should be effectively conserved. Currently, only about a fourth of the area foreseen in Target 3 has been conserved in the context of marine and coastal areas. And effective conservation measures are necessary to uphold human rights. The loss of marine biodiversity due to overfishing, pollution, habitat loss, and other drivers is seriously harming human rights, especially of those most closely dependent on the ocean, such as indigenous peoples, small-scale fishers, fish workers, and others. For example, indigenous peoples' connection with the ocean is deeply reflected in their livelihoods, food security, and culture. And the overexploitation of aquatic resources puts their right to self-determination, as well as many other human rights, at risk. At the same time, indigenous peoples, small-scale fishers, fish workers, and others are stewards in protecting the ocean's biodiversity. They play an essential role in restoring, conserving, and managing local aquatic and coastal ecosystems. And as pointed out by the Special Rapporteur on the right to food in his recent report, small-scale fishers, self-governing through communal marine tenure system often create broad benefits. He gives an example of a customary tenure system from Sri Lanka, managed on a rotational basis by particular families and villagers. And the system fosters impartial fisheries management and ensures a fair distribution of benefits. It also acts as a powerful deterrent against overfishing and the depletion of marine resources. It guarantees secure and impartial access to fishing grounds. It significantly diminishes conflict and promotes sustainable coexistence among diverse groups of fishers. This is why the qualitative criteria of Target 3 are essential. In addition to the quantitative 30% criterion, Target 3 also requires that protected areas be governed equitably and while recognizing and respecting the rights of indigenous peoples and local communities, including over their territories. Only when both the quantitative and qualitative elements of Target 3 are fulfilled can its implementation be successful and sustainable. This also transpires from the findings of IPBES. According to its recently published Transformative Change Assessment, conservation that involves sustainable stewardship, notably by indigenous peoples and local communities, contributes to transformative change when it is inclusive, well-resourced, focused on places of high value to nature and people, and when the rights of indigenous peoples are recognized. Essential criteria that apply to all KMGBF's targets, including Target 3, are also to be found in the framework section C. So it's important not to focus only on the targets, but also on the section C, which sets out that the implementation of the entire framework, meaning all its goals and targets, should follow a human rights-based approach and be gender responsive. This also applies to the establishment and management of marine protected areas. And it means that measures are necessary to ensure that indigenous peoples, coastal communities, including small-scale fishers, as well as others who depend on the ocean resources for their culture, health, livelihoods, and food are not exposed to human rights violations resulting from the designation of marine protected areas or from fishing restrictions due to large-scale conservation initiatives. Conservation that follows a human rights-based approach and is gender responsive can promote beneficial outcomes for both people and for biodiversity. Another essential aspect of the implementation of Target 3 in the context of the ocean is participation. The establishment and governance of marine protected areas has to be participatory, including all relevant rights holders in the decision-making. This also relates to Target 22 of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, another crucial target in the context of marine protected areas. The target concerns the full and effective participation of indigenous peoples and local communities, women and girls, children and youth, and persons with disabilities in decision-making. It also concerns access to justice and information, and a key element of Target 22 is the full protection of environmental human rights defenders. According to the IPBES Transformative Change Assessment, which I recently also mentioned, protecting environmental human rights defenders from violence and rights violations supports transformative change. And in its recent decision, the COP16 found that further efforts are needed for the implementation of Target 22 specifically in the context of marine, coastal, and island biodiversity. As you may be aware, last October, the Human Rights Council adopted Resolution 57/28 on biodiversity and human rights, which requests OHCHR to provide technical assistance to states on a human rights-based approach to biodiversity conservation, sustainable use, and the fair and equitable sharing of its benefits. And OHCHR stands ready to support states in the implementation of the KMGBF with human rights at the center, including in the context of the ocean. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nela. Thank you so much, Nela, for sharing with us key elements of a human rights-based approach to marine conservation, and highlighting really the importance of both the qualitative and quantitative elements of Target 3, but also the other targets of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which leads us to our next panelist, Mrinalini Rai, who is the Director of Women for Biodiversity. Thank you so much for coming in person to Geneva. We're very happy to have you, and you are going to also, in a way, continue in that line, highlighting human rights issues and impacts and marine protected areas and the linkages with the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. And you also have, in a way, through your work, a focus and a highlight on gender perspective as well. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Alex, and hi, Nela. Thanks, Astrid. I think you've given me my work much more easier, setting the tone, especially with the report, which is, I think, comes at a very, very crucial time and an important space where I think there are also going to be rolling out discussions from, if you're following the CBD, which is a Convention on Biological Diversity's Cali outcome, which has very strong outcome document, also decisions on the marine and coastal biodiversity, including sustainable use. So I'm just going to be building up from what Astrid talked about. You can go to the next slide. Astrid talked about, and Nela, now I wear glasses, so luckily I have it on my screen. This is what happens, start getting old. So at least the viewers can see. So I'm briefly just going to be looking at the discussions around, because the focus was on Target 3. One thing I would really like to also state that is that the Biodiversity Convention, the discussion around marine and coastal biodiversity is not a new agenda that has cropped up. So I just very basically looking at the MPA and CBD, there is a definition adopted by the CBD on what a protected area is. It's under its own preamble or text in Article 2, and also in Article 8 of the Convention that contains very specific reference on how or the modalities a protected area is. So I think that was a baseline, and this was what, 1992 we are talking about, right? The discussion around marine protected areas, and I think some reflection on the other OECM that people know is the other effective area-based conservation measures, there was a discussion around it around 2010 at COP10 in Nagoya, where there was actually mobilized, concretized under the ICHA biodiversity target, ABT, which is target 11. This is really very important, is because that is a space where the term was coined OECMs. And it's a very important relevance for when we are looking at other conservation areas that may not be protected areas, when we're talking about indigenous peoples, lands, and territories, and who are not under a state governance model. There was a discussion, I won't go, but there was a terminology and glossary on OECMs adopted. And fast forward not almost 12 years after that is where we again see this 30 by 30. Everybody is very much focused on 30 by 30, which I think we should actually focus on the whole of the KMGBF. An example of that is that in Target 3, but Nella already talked about, it's a percentage. The percentage was set also in 2010 for 17% terrestrial and 10 on marine protected. It is one of the targets. If you look at the review on the Global Biodiversity Outlook, is the most easiest achievable, and that has been by demarcating, like Astrid talked about. Okay, We have great green area. Okay, here is an MPA. Here's a protected area. All right, done. And this was actually, the assessment was that this was actually the only target of the Asia biodiversity target, which had actually excelled but the rest of the Asia biodiversity target. There were 20 of them, didn't work out. And I think we should not do the same thing with the KMGBF. We really need to look at how target 3 is one of the 23 targets, and to really have this holistic approach to biodiversity conservation, living in harmony with nature, and also mitigating climate change. If you don't take the whole system together, you may again fail. More human rights violations, because there are going to be stricter policies. We're talking about financing, right? You have ecosystem-based approaches, and Astrid, I'm actually really happy because you really put a focus on ecosystem-based approaches, because that's really very important, because nature is not just a element of environment, but when you talk about biodiversity, at least our understanding, at least my understanding, is that you look at the relationships, it's more holistic, it is not only carbon. I know there's a lot of discussions and in the ocean space on blue carbon. And one particular element that I really want the group to focus also from the human rights perspective, Nella, you mentioned the Human Rights Council decision on human rights and biodiversity, is an element that has not been touched upon, is sustainable use. And this is a very, I would really have more experts discussing more about it, because what is the purpose of MPAs, right? Is it for conservation, restoration? But also understanding that where the climate has impact, so other discussions around new sources of energy, explorations are happening in the guise of that, in the guise of, we need this for the just transition. I'll be very blunt, right? We need this for transition minerals, critical minerals, sources. And that's also where the deep sea exploration is taking place, in the guise that we've been looking at these new technologies. So I'm really very worried that either we are giving state more reason to have these big areas, 30% of the world protected, is the impact on governance. Who's going to govern it? What is the purpose of that? Because one of the biggest challenge in biodiversity has been funding for these areas. And the funding of these areas, if you're not familiar with it, again, this is my personal take on that, is what's called, it's going to be on assets and benefit sharing. So I just want to look at this one quick timeline, sorry, taking a lot of time, is that we're talking about the marine and coastal biodiversity came into already in 1994. So discussion where it happened at that time, and in 1994, and in 2024, where there was this idea around what should be the deliverables around protected areas, marine protected areas. The discussions around here with CBD is, we're talking about, Astrid, like, how do we really look into that? It's not only this area, but how do we complement the other areas? Because you can't stop water. You can't stop like, okay, this is a marine protected area. We will do our best to conserve it, but we will exploit everything else. It will impact it. So I think with that one, maybe just the last one, I'll just end with that. Next slide, please. And looking at, I wanted to address this question, which was in the concept note, is that how do protected areas sufficient to ensure the protection of the ocean biome? Some food for thought. One thing when I was looking at the UN conference, and hopefully that attention from biodiversity goes in, because Astrid's report has a lot of reference for biodiversity. And I think it's really important we need to change the narrative. We need to change the narrative saying that ecosystems are important for us, period. Ecosystem is not there only to mitigate carbon. And I'm pointing this out because I saw the high-level statements for the UN Ocean Conference. And if you look around the conference, it's all about carbon. It's all about climate. There's not a single word, at least that I've kind of seen there, or even head of states talking about, that have mentioned biodiversity. So that's the kind of a shift that we really need, is that when we look at carbon, we're not looking at only oceans as carbon sinks. And one element that I saw that in the conference was this. So the way that biodiversity is cradled under, I put it there, is biodiversity reserve. Now that for me is scary when you're talking about genetic resources, right? Marine genetic resources, for whatever you may talk about it. And we really need people to come on board, really look at these, because every single word that we come up with, as you know, if you're in negotiations, has a really strong implication. And this is the implication we're talking about on people, on lives of communities. And we really need to understand that they have rights. We talk about their rights holders. They cannot be, what do we call it? What is the word that they always use? Unintended consequences. And I feel that's what we are getting at. Well, for the greater good, well, we may have to. No, we really need to change that model of what we really look into when we're looking at it. So we need to shift that narrative. That's why I put XXX, coin some terms if we can. The importance of identification is designation. Then you talk about governance, Nelly and Astrid already talked about it. The balance between protection and livelihoods. It's not only about protection, people need to eat. And they protect. How we assert their rights, including funding, capacity, technology, whatever you may talk about it. And undefined drivers of marine and coastal ecosystem loss. Where are we talking about deep sea mining? Will that ocean conference address that? What are we talking about sonar radiation which is happening in the Arctic, right? Which is impacting indigenous communities there, having less fish, or exploration that are going for more minerals, right? Where's the discussion? I hope the UN conference, the ocean conference is going to look into that. Recognition of indigenous peoples and local communities' rights. Of course, I talked about the biodiversity reserve. And also, I'll just leave it there because we haven't discussed, it's on emerging issues on genetics, marine genetics, and the really contextual issue around access and benefit sharing, and how it will really ensure that there are no future human rights violations for anybody involved. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tina. Thank you very much for sharing these perspectives and really a lot of food for thought in light of the UN conference on ocean coming. You highlighted also the threats of deep sea mining. So I take this opportunity to mention that the next talk just after this one is exactly on that topic. So that's really something that is, we need to explore it and continue the discussion, continue to raise awareness. And then you really also highlighted rights holders. And so I'm happy to introduce our next speaker. So we will have now two cases and stories and situation or rather cases of people in vulnerable situations and also agents of change. It was raised in all of your presentation, actually, the situation of small-scale fisher people. And so we'll have now Ana Maria Tablada Aguilar from the she's the Central America Hub representative for Bosques del Mundo from Honduras. Thank you so much for being with us today and for sharing the story and the case from Honduras. The floor is yours.
Good morning. And I'm really happy to be here. I'm going to make this presentation, but I have to say that we are working with different organizations. I'm just the voice in this space. And we're working with FIAN and other NGOs in Honduras. So thank you very much for your attention. So I really do appreciate when you say it's one ocean. Let's stop speaking about one ocean here. It's our ocean as humanity. So welcome to La Mosquita in Honduras. Maybe if we can go to the next slide, maybe you don't identify clearly where is Honduras. Honduras is it's the middle part of American continent. And also we have the Mesoamerican reef. We have the second coral reef, more important of the world. And we have really good initiatives for protecting the marine ecosystem. And they also have other organizations promoting to create these 12 nautical miles to protect, because they have 100% of the really important mangrove forests, 100% of the sea pass, and 83% of the coral reef. So this is a really, really important area and shared with 4 countries, with Mexico, Honduras, Belize, and Guatemala. Next slide, please. So what is the situation? The situation is that we have a country with no experience, no laws, no technical expertise in oil, in carbon extraction. So we found out that Honduras has signed a contract with this international enterprise. They're trying to offshore extract oil, and this is going to affect this really important ecosystem, and is going to affect 5 of the 9 indigenous people. It's going to affect thousands of local communities in more than 75,000 people who lives in relationship with the sea for food. Next slide, please. We found this model. If we have an oil spill, they will affect all the coral reef. It's going to affect protected area. It's going to affect all the people who are living in the coast of Honduras and in the coast of Belize and Guatemala. And this is a huge threat. Next slide, please. We found out that the contract, because we don't have expertise, we even don't have careers, technical NGO capacities in the state to manage the situation. So we found out that the contract even have these clauses that say that if you read really slow the contract, you will find that there will not be responsibility easy to show for the company, because they sign without no expertise, without no advice. And it's so easy to go to these small countries and sell. We have green technology, we're promoting green, we are committed, we have technology. And because we don't know, we sign, and now we are in this situation. Next, please. And if this is going ahead, we will have really impact in different kind of rights. Rights to information is really hard to find because the contract has this no shared information. We have, is going to be affected, we say, indigenous right, the right to a healthy environment, the how to participation, the right to food. We know from other cases in the continent that we're going to receive impact on the lives of the people, especially for women. Next, please. So this is a little, I will not read it, but this is what we found as an organization, that we are trying to identify what is happening. We saw a lot of enterprise ways to work in this. We found opacity, we found no consultations or really bad consultation speaks for indigenous people, no consultation with local communities. We don't have standards in environment ways to. All the standards that we have for this case are promoting for the company, so not for the country, because we don't have the expertise, as I said before. Next, please. So what is the message we want to share with you? This is a small country. Sometimes small country in this situation we don't have this mediatic coverage, but we think this is a great opportunity to stop it. We are on time. We are in the first phase to exploration. We are not in exploitation phase. So we think we are on time to stop, to create this a good example, to create this opportunity, because as we can see, we are affecting we will have biodiversity loss, we will have pollution, we will have climate change, and we will have the situation on the global crisis. Next, please. So we are positive. So we think we can have these spaces, international spaces. We will ask for this can be on reports, on recommendation to the countries. And we are positive. We think that we have learned from our mistakes. You can see the cases on Nigeria, on Ecuador, on Peru. You can see all the cases. We know that if we are going with this, we're going to have these consequences, but we are on time to try to stop and to try to protect the ecosystem, the people are living in relationship, and especially the rights of the humanity. So thank you very much. That was my presentation.
Thank you so much, Ana Maria.
Thank you so much for raising in more detail really also one crucial point around offshore oil and gas and the threats and actually when it happens in the marine protected areas or whether it happens outside as was described before, it really has impacts. And so now we're going to have the video message from Alfonso Simón Raylan, who is a representative from the Sindicato de Trabajadores del Mar in Panama. So the video is in Spanish and subtitled in English, and I'm just going to briefly explain to you what it is about the issue that he's sharing with us. So he's sharing with us this, and by the way, I also thank the colleagues. So from FIAM earlier, as you thanked, from Cope Solidar for the links also with Alfonso. And so he's reporting a case from their community. Their community is the Ngabe Bugle indigenous people, and they have raised with the Panama Ministry of Environment questions regarding tourism activities and development plans in several protected areas. And as a response, the Environment Ministry has proposed to create a one-year renewable moratorium on all external economic activities in 3 protected areas. So one of which is the area where Alfonso and the community lives. And that means that only conservation-focused activities would be permitted, which means small-scale fisheries and indigenous peoples from the area are really afraid that they wouldn't be able to have a livelihood anymore because they depend solely on fishing, on small-scale fishing for education, for their livelihoods. And so they're really afraid that ultimately these steps of the moratorium, that the ultimate step is actually a way to evacuate them from the area. So now we're going to listen to his message.
Vengo de Panamá, soy indígena del pueblo Ngabe Bugle. Nosotros de la región del pueblo indígena tenemos por únicamente la pesca en nuestra región. Tenemos la isla Escudo de Veragua por naturaleza, por tiempo, por año, donde estas indígenas, Ngabe Bugle, ha dedicado la pesca por más de 100 años. Y hoy por hoy, autoridad tradicional que nosotros mismos le damos la confianza para que fuese ser nuestra autoridad, juntamente con el gobierno, ellos han tomado una decisión sobre la isla Escudo de Veragua de privatizarlo por 1 año. Y si le contamos cuántas comunidades, cuántos corregimientos, eso lo podemos decir con mucha confianza. Por ejemplo, tenemos más de 27 comunidades que dedican la pesca en esta isla Escudo de Veragua y 3 corregimientos y el distrito de Cusapín que compone la área. Entonces, si contáramos desde niños, ancianos, mujeres, señores, por todo, llevamos más de 30,000 personas que dedican directa, tanto indirectamente, la pesca en esta isla. Nosotros nos familiarizamos uniéndonos muchas comunidades en una sola isla para dedicar nuestra actividad por tiempos. Estas islas, ¿qué nos representan? Nos representa la alimentación, nos representa la salud, nos representa la educación. Entonces, estoy hablando de esta manera en forma de denuncia para que el mundo y el pueblo y todos quienes tengan interés de apoyarnos en la pesca que nos apoyen. Porque asimismo, anteriormente, la gente ha venido conquistando. Hay un documento que está girando en redes sociales y también he recibido directamente este documento que está firmado por las autoridades tradicionales como recibido por las autoridades nacionales, donde dice que se quiere privatizar la isla Escudo de Veragua por 1 año. Y preguntemos, ¿dónde entonces los pescadores van a dedicar su actividad si esa es la única isla que tenemos para dedicar la actividad? La veda que fue creada en 2010, esta veda afecta al grupo pesquero de la región de la comarca. Y ahora, Si se privatiza la isla Escudo por un año, preguntemos a dónde vamos a dedicar nuestras actividades para darle el sustento a nuestras familias. Estamos en problemas serios, señores, grupos organizados, compañeros que me apoyan, compañeros que están en mi organización, levantemos el voz juntos y vamos a buscar una manera de lucha para ver qué se pueden lograr. Porque nosotros no podemos quedar con las manos cruzadas. Si quedamos con las manos cruzadas, perderemos todos. Porque así mismo vinieron la gente anteriormente, quitando nuestras islas, engañando a nuestros abuelos, como la isla Zapatilla 1, Zapatilla 2. ¿Qué le dijeron a la gente? Le dijeron que usted y su familia va a tener trabajo de por vida. Y llegó el momento de que a ellos lo sacaron de ahí, lo echaron de ahí, y entonces eso es lo que quieren hacer, está buscando con la isla de Veragua, que nosotros no lo vamos a permitir.
And that's the letter that he's referring to. Thank you so much, Alfonso, for sharing the situation in Panama, in your community, which is really highlighting some of the issues that we've discussed and the complexity when there is no participation and no true involvement of local communities of indigenous peoples. So now we are with our last two panelists. We are going to go back to maybe a global view again. So we start with Ava Ibanez Amador from Earth Justice, who is an associate attorney for the Ocean Program. And so she is so Earth Justice contributed a submission to the report of the special rapporteur on the impact of global overfishing and of offshore oil and gas. So Ava, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. My name is Ava Ibanez Amador, and I am an attorney at Earth Justice, which is an environmental nonprofit law organization that wields the power of law to protect people's health, preserve wildlife, advance clean energy, and combat climate change. I am here today to add and to support the important remarks you've already heard, and to talk about the marine biodiversity crisis, its connection to the human rights, and how establishing a global network of marine protected areas can protect biodiversity and people alike. Human rights are inextricably connected to the ocean. In fact, the marine biodiversity crisis threatens basic human needs, such as access to food. Fishing provides a major source of protein to feed vulnerable coastal nations. Clean air. The ocean produces half of the world's oxygen. And housing. Marine ecosystems like coral reefs protect coastal communities from destructive flooding and storms. The role of the ocean also goes beyond human physical needs. It is the source of spiritualism, fundamental life philosophies, and culture. In the Pacific, for example, we have represented clients who have a kinship relationship with marine life and consider whales their ancestors as well as physical manifestations of the god of the sea. So definitely, it is more than just a carbon sink. And in short, when marine biodiversity declines and marine ecosystems suffer, humans suffer too. And unfortunately, that is our current reality. Industrial overfishing, illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, climate change, water pollution, habitat destruction, just to name a few, have all contributed to the marine biodiversity crisis. Overfishing in particular is considered the primary threat to global marine biodiversity. Large-scale industrial fleets engage in indiscriminate exploitation, leading to depletion of harvestable stocks of fish and threatening the continued existence of species such as sea turtles, whales, and sharks, and you name it. Today, over 1/3 of shark and ray species are threatened with extinction. And this crisis is not only reflected in recent scientific studies, which show that overfishing is indeed the largest driver of global shark decline, but we can also see this crisis in the direct experiences of people. I have experienced this firsthand with our partners in coastal nations in Latin America, who often lack the support from their government to protect sharks or other species and look to international law for legal support and solutions. Other industrial activities also destroy entire marine habitats in the interest of private profits. Our clients in the United States and our partners around the world continue to fight offshore oil and gas projects that pose hazards to human health, risk oil spills that can destroy livelihoods and wipe out entire ecosystems, not to mention the harm to wildlife from things like seismic blasting, which can deafen marine mammals like whales. So in the face of alternative behavior, there is no excuse for this uncontrolled, self-interested exploitation of our ocean. So what can we do? Establishing marine protected areas with strict restrictions can help protect species by foreclosing harmful industrial activity in key ocean areas. Recent studies have found that strategically expanding the existing global marine protected area network would decrease industrial fishing and improve future catch by up to 20%. Marine protected areas can also help remediate the harmful effects of historical overfishing, including protecting important habitats and providing a refuge for migratory species. Protecting more of our ocean commons allows for the rebalance of equity from the few nations who can subsidize and afford to fish industrially in distant waters to the coastal nations who depend on a healthy marine ecosystem. A global fishing network that prohibits or restricts fishing must also include expansive areas of the high seas. Illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, which is often associated with forced labor, human trafficking, and unsafe work conditions, accounts for roughly 20% of global fish catch and often targets species on the high seas. However, only 0.8% of the high seas have spatial protections currently. And while it is true that marine protected areas pose implementation and enforcement challenges, they can be a powerful tool if implemented in conjunction with other instruments that address transparency and human rights. Nations should be encouraged to ratify the UN Agreement on Marine Biodiversity of Areas Beyond National Jurisdiction to establish a framework of protected areas in the high seas. Simultaneously, regional fisheries management organizations, also known as RFMOs, which are international bodies established through international agreements for the sustainable management of fish stocks around the world, should work to strengthen compliance measures, improve transparency, and incorporate human rights into fishery management measures. In conclusion, if implemented correctly, and by that I mean holistically, taking into account biodiversity hotspots, transparency challenges, fishing measures, and of course, human rights, a network of marine protected areas could be an incredibly effective tool to protect our ocean. With that, I sincerely thank you for your attention and participation in the session, and also a special shout out to Astrid for bringing focus to our ocean.
Thank you so much, Eva. Thank you for sharing these perspectives and also sharing how and giving elements as to how marine protected areas can be a powerful tool if they are implemented in a human rights-based approach. Thank you very much. We are moving now to our last but not least speaker, Arno van der Velpen from UNEP Grid in Geneva, who is the Sand Industry and Data Analytics Officer, and who is also going to share with us what you see from your work that are issues and potential around marine protected areas. Thank you, Arno.
Thank you. Wonderful. I'm going to talk about a topic that we don't usually talk about when we talk about the oceans. I'm going to talk about sand. And I'll see whether I can go in the slides. Or I do it without slides? I can do it without slides.
I think you move on.
Maybe you start.
Okay, I'll do it without slides. So I'll talk about sand. And when I talk about sand, most people think about the desert. But in our day-to-day world, our relationship with sand is rather in the form of concrete and asphalt. We use it to build our roads, our schools, our houses. We use it to build hydropower dams. If it is very pure in silica, we use it to build glass, to make glass, and even chips. However, we need an enormous amount of sand. And every year we extract about 50 billion tons of sand, gravel, and crushed rock, which is enough to build a wall around the Earth of 27 meters wide, 27 meters high, and this every year. And last year, we, for the first time, calculated the amount of sediment that we are extracting from our ocean. And we came to a number around about 6 billion tons. This is like a wall of 9 meters wide, 9 meters high, all around the equator every year, or 1 million dumper trucks per day. And over 15% of the sand and gravel and sediment is taken from marine protected areas. And in the West, this goes even over 25%. And that is at least for what we can track, for the extraction we can track. Dredging and marine works have concrete impacts on our marine environment. You have to imagine these large vessels which act like vacuum cleaners that suck up the sediments, that crush the benthic organisms, that create big plumes, which are clouds of fine materials that smother coral reefs. Coral reefs which are affected by those plumes are 6 times more likely to experience wide-scale bleaching events. And what is actually even more concerning is very few countries. My pointer is not working. So I quickly go over those images that I have been talking about, and here the 50 billion tons of sand, the wall of 27 meters wide and 27 meters high. The fact that the sand that we extract typically doesn't come from the desert because it's too fine. It actually comes from quarries, rivers, and indeed the ocean. And that here you see the map that we created for the dredging vessels that we can track on a platform that we call Marine Sand Watch. And we see the distribution of the extractive activities per country. And here you see also for the different regions in the world, which marine protected areas, the percentage for that region that comes from marine protected areas. So marine sand, of course, don't get me wrong, it's a crucial material. We use it to nourish our beaches, to create it goes from nourishing our beaches and protecting our shores to creating artificial islands and wind farms. And here on this slide, I wanted to present some of the direct and indirect impacts, and some of the gravest ones are those plumes. It's these big sediment clouds that smother, but also the direct removal of habitats. If you remove gravel beds, which are pretty rare in the ocean space, you oftentimes remove an entire habitat. A beach without sand will not be a habitat anymore for a turtle. So it will not lay its eggs anymore. And so very few countries anticipate the future needs of the sand they need in the face of sea level rise. Cities are going to be moved away. Coastlines will be reinforced with sand. And if we do not anticipate where this sand and gravel is going to come from, countries will face themselves with a hard choice. They will probably take the sand where it is easily accessible. So it is not going to come from the cable routes, the ocean cable routes. It's not going to come from the marine access ways. It's not going to come from the wind farms. And the question is, are the marine protected areas are the marine protected areas of today going to be the sand mines of the future?
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Arnaud. This is actually, you're very right. It's a perspective we don't talk about. And thank you so much for providing so many facts and elements around this. It's really staggering in terms of the perspective. We are, so thank you to all our panelists. We are now actually very close to having to wrap up, because as we mentioned, there will be an event starting in 5 minutes on deep sea, on the threats of deep sea mining. But I really would like to thank all our panelists again, and maybe Astrid, to maybe in 1 minute, if you want, after having listened to all the perspectives, if you have like some concluding words that you would like to share, for, yeah, I guess 1 minute.
In 1 minute. I just really want to thank you all for being here, for all the effort that we're doing. It can be very depressing to hear all of these stories. But I really want to close with, and it's not only just an optimistic hope, but it's, as we know, there are a lot of alternatives. There's a lot of things, as you were mentioning, are like this artificial island. There's so many things that humanity are doing that we do not need like that. So it's really, for me, it really gives me not only hope, but I'm so grateful that this just very simple 10,000 words of a report opens all of these conversations and gives us the possibility to have these exchanges of knowledge, which to me are very, very, very rich. And I just want to close with an invitation to continue the conversation and to have spaces like this. I mean, I know that an hour is so little, and hopefully we can share also the PowerPoints that you share, because we are taking pictures, but if you can share that so that we can actually use it. In the website also for the report, we updated, uploaded the report, also annexes with a lot of information that you received and the inputs that you receive very a lot of information. So we really encourage us to continue using this and to pressure also states and businesses to do the right thing, because there's a lot of need to do it, and there's a lot of alternatives and big businesses in protecting the ocean as well, and indigenous peoples and everyone's rights. So thank you again very much for being here and sharing your expertise. Thank you.
Those who are in the room, there's a session on deep sea mining, I just heard, and we can find is a new link. So we are going to close here the connection and see you soon. Thank you to all. Thank you to Ava. You stayed very late in the evening to join us from the US. So thank you to all. Bye.
Yeah, it's taking time for this. It's 2 in the morning. Yeah. Oh. I think she's